The most dangerous island in the world isn't surrounded by water anymore. The Aral Sea dried up, and now you can walk there. That fact alone should stop you. What's buried on Возрождение Island? Hundreds of tons of weaponized anthrax spores, genetically modified to resist every known vaccine, was once separated from the mainland by 60 kilometers of open water. Soviet engineers considered that distance sufficient. It wasn't a question of ethics, it was a question of logistics. Today, the logistics have changed. The water is gone. The spores, according to most assessments, are not. This is the endpoint of a list that begins with a volcano and ends with a bioweapon. And the through line is the same in every case. Humans identified a place as too dangerous to enter, and the reason was almost always something they themselves had done or unleashed. In 1963, a new island erupted from the North Atlantic near Iceland. Scientists declared it a sterile laboratory, a rare chance to watch life colonize bare rock from zero. The rules were strict enough that a single accidentally introduced tomato seed triggered an international incident. Off the coast of Brazil, a snake island holds the golden lancehead pit viper, whose venom digests flesh 5 times faster than any mainland relative. The Brazilian Navy prohibits landing. In the Pacific, the residents of Niihau, Hawaii, have maintained their isolation voluntarily for over a century. No tourists, no outsiders, the last fluent speakers of a dying language behind a boundary more effective than any wall. And in the lagoon outside Venice, plague quarantine became psychiatric ward, became documented torture facility, all on the same ground. North Sentinel Island's inhabitants have maintained their boundary for 60,000 years. They killed the last missionary who tried to cross it in 2018. These are 13 places that define themselves by refusal. Refusal of entry, refusal of contamination, refusal of the assumption that every place on Earth is available to anyone with a ticket. Number 13. Surtsey. A scientist was once removed from a research program because of a partially digested tomato. That sentence is not a metaphor. In 1998, a researcher working on the Icelandic island of Surtsey found a tomato seedling growing in the interior of the island. The source was traced to an undigested piece of food from one of the visiting scientists. The incident was reviewed by the international scientific community. The seedling was immediately destroyed. To understand why this mattered so much, you need to go back to November 1963. That month, a submarine volcano punched through the floor of the Atlantic Ocean south of Iceland and broke the surface. What began as a column of steam and ash gradually became a solid black rock, and then a fully formed island of roughly 2 square kilometers. Scientists immediately recognized what they were witnessing: the first opportunity in the history of science to observe from absolute zero how barren volcanic rock becomes a living ecosystem. Surtsey was declared a strictly protected scientific reserve. Access is limited to a small number of accredited researchers, and every visit is governed by rigorous biological cleanliness protocols. Clothing is sterilized, footwear is checked, equipment is inspected. The goal is to ensure that no seed, no microorganism, no insect arrives on the island by accident. Natural colonization must proceed without human assistance. Decades later, the results are visible. Birds now nest on Surtsey. Mosses grow across the rock. Earthworms have appeared. The island is becoming alive on its own terms. But that fragility is exactly the reason it remains closed. The human presence here poses no physical danger to people. It poses a danger to the integrity of the experiment itself. Surtsey may be the only forbidden place on Earth that exists not to keep people safe from nature, but to keep nature safe from people. Number 12. Niihau. It sits about 17 miles off the southwestern coast of Kauai, close enough to see on a clear day, close enough that you might think you could simply sail over. You cannot, not without permission, and permission for more than a century and a half has almost never been granted. In 1864, a Scottish entrepreneur named Elizabeth Sinclair paid King Kamehameha V $10,000 in gold for the entire island. Her descendants, the Robinson family, have owned it ever since. They have also, deliberately and consistently, kept the rest of the world out. Roughly 170 native Hawaiians live here. They ranch, hunt, fish. They make shell lays from tiny poo-poo shells, necklaces so precisely crafted and so rare that they sell for thousands of dollars and are considered among the finest surviving examples of traditional Hawaiian craft. They speak Hawaiian, not the classroom variety, not the preserved for ceremony kind, but the everyday, spoken at breakfast, argued over at dinner language that has vanished almost everywhere else on the archipelago. Niihau is one of the last places on Earth where Hawaiian breathes as a living tongue. There are no paved roads, no running water, no internet, no connection to the main power grid. Journalists have been refused for decades. Researchers send letters that go unanswered. The Robinsons say they are protecting the community from the kind of outside influence that dismantled traditional Hawaiian life on every other island. Critics call it paternalism dressed as preservation. The debate has never been resolved because the island remains closed and the residents, largely, remain silent. The comparison to North Korea gets made often enough that it has become a cliché. But it points at something real. Organised helicopter tours do land on Niihau, on the uninhabited southern shore, well away from the village. Tourists are not permitted to approach the residents. In December 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor, a Japanese pilot made an emergency landing here. What followed, the Niihau incident, revealed just how violently the outside world can intrude on a place that thought it had successfully closed its doors. Niihau is a chosen isolation, and chosen isolation, however fragile, is still a choice. There are places where no such choice existed, where people were brought against their will and left to face something far worse than solitude. Up to 40% of the topsoil on Poveglia Island is made of human ash and bone. That is not a legend. Geologists and archaeologists have confirmed it through direct analysis of the ground beneath your feet, or rather, beneath the feet of the birds and wild shrubs that now have the island entirely to themselves. Because number 11 on our list has been officially closed to visitors for decades. To understand how an island's soil becomes a graveyard, you have to go back to the 14th century. When the Black Death reached Europe, the Venetian Republic did something no government had done before. It built a functioning quarantine system. Poveglia, sitting in the southern end of the lagoon, just a narrow channel away from the city, became the center of that infrastructure. The infected were brought here. The dead were brought here. Bodies were burned on the island itself. Across several centuries of recurring plague, an estimated 160,000 people died on this small, unremarkable scrap of land. The island was then repurposed. In 1889, a psychiatric hospital opened within the old buildings. Documented accounts from patients and staff describe a chief physician who conducted experiments on inmates, procedures that, by any reasonable standard, constituted torture. Local tradition holds that the doctor eventually lost his mind and threw himself from the bell tower, the same leaning tower still visible today above the overgrown vegetation. The hospital closed in 1968. Since then, the Italian government has auctioned the island multiple times. Every development attempt has collapsed. Investors walked away without explanation. Today, Poveglia sits untouched, while the lagoon slowly eats its shoreline. The next island on our list kept no such silence. Its secrets were not buried, they were bombed into rubble. A city of nearly 5,000 people vanished in a matter of weeks, and nobody came back to collect their belongings. Clothes still hang in the closets. Furniture sits where it was left.
That is Hashima Island,
and the speed of its abandonment is one of the more unsettling facts in modern urban history. But before the ghost town, there was the record. In 1959, this 6-hectare speck of rock off Nagasaki held more than 80,000 people per square kilometer, making it the most densely populated place ever reliably documented on Earth. The reason anything was built here at all was coal. Mitsubishi acquired the island in 1890 and proceeded to construct a vertical city on top of it. Concrete apartment blocks rising straight from the sea, linked by internal staircases and corridors so that residents rarely needed to go outside. There was no soil, no greenery, no open space. The island's silhouette, blocky and low on the horizon, resembled a battleship, which is how it earned its Japanese nickname, Gunkanjima. During World War II, Korean and Chinese labourers were brought to the island under compulsion and forced to work the submarine coal seams. The conditions were severe. Japan's official position on this period remains incomplete, and the gap between the historical record and the formal acknowledgement continues to cause friction with Seoul. When Hashima was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2015, South Korea objected precisely because this chapter was absent from the nomination. The coal ran out in 1974. Mitsubishi shut the operation down, the workers and their families left, and the island went silent. Salt winds have been taking the buildings apart ever since. Balconies lean over the surf, staircases lead nowhere, walls return slowly to aggregate. That particular quality of ruin made Hashima the obvious choice for the villain's lair in the Bond film Skyfall. Ranked 10th on our list, Hashima is one of those places where industrial ambition, human suffering, and institutional forgetting have all compressed into a single address. A woman spent 23 years imprisoned on an island without ever being convicted of a crime. No trial, no sentence, no legal process of any kind. Just a doctor's report and a boat ride across the East River. North Brother Island sits in the middle of the strait between the Bronx and Queens, a 22-acre fragment of land physically surrounded by one of the densest urban concentrations on the planet, yet completely unreachable. There are no ferries, no bridges, no civilian docks. The island has been officially closed since 1963, and the city has simply let nature take over. Ivy and climbing vines have swallowed the red brick buildings of the old Riverside Hospital complex whole. Trees push up through collapsed rooftops. Root systems dismantle walls from the inside. The architecture is disappearing, slowly, quietly, the way inconvenient things tend to disappear. The hospital opened in 1895 as a facility for isolating infectious patients. In 1904, it received survivors of the General Slocum steamboat fire, the deadliest maritime disaster in New York history, claiming more than 1,100 lives. But the case that defined the island belongs to Mary Mallon, an Irish-born cook who became the first person in the United States identified as an asymptomatic carrier of typhoid fever. She infected at least 51 people. 3 died. Authorities detained her here in 1907, released her under conditions she eventually violated, then returned her in 1915. She never left again. Mary Mallon died on the island in 1938, having spent the last 23 years of her life in forced isolation imposed entirely by public health officials acting without judicial oversight. The state had decided that her body was a threat, and that was enough. North Brother Island now serves as a protected bird sanctuary, restricted even to most researchers. The ruins remain. Number 9 on our list. If this island represents the power a government can exercise over a single body, the next one represents something far larger. The deadliest animal attack on a human population in recorded history was not a shark frenzy, not a stampede, not a plague of venomous creatures. It was a single night in a mangrove swamp, and most of the world has never heard of it. This is number 8 on our list. Ramri Island, Burma, February 1945. To understand why close to 1,000 Japanese soldiers walked into a crocodile-infested swamp in the middle of the night, you have to understand the military logic that left them no other choice. Ramri Island sits off the Burmese coast on the Bay of Bengal, and for the Japanese garrison that had held it since the occupation, it was a strategic foothold worth defending. By mid-February 1945, that calculation had collapsed. British naval forces sealed the sea routes. British infantry was closing the land perimeter. The only exit still theoretically open ran through the mangrove interior of the island toward evacuation points on the far shore. Command gave the order. Approximately 980 men entered the swamp. What made Ramri's mangroves especially lethal was not the terrain or the darkness, though both were disorienting enough. The swamps are prime habitat for the saltwater crocodile, the largest reptile on Earth. Adult males routinely exceed 6 meters in length and 1,000 kilograms in weight. They are ambush predators of extraordinary patience, nearly silent beneath the water's surface, and they do not issue warnings. British naturalist Bruce Stanley Wright was embedded with the expeditionary force that night. He later wrote that what his unit heard from the edge of the swamp, the screams, the sporadic gunfire, the sounds that came out of the darkness, ranked among the most harrowing of his life. By dawn, fewer than 20 soldiers had emerged alive. The Guinness Book of Records has since logged the event as the largest mass killing of humans by animals ever documented. Historians correctly note that the final death toll remains contested. Disease, drowning, exhaustion, and British fire all contributed to the casualties. But the saltwater crocodile population in those waters is a documented fact, and no serious researcher disputes that the animals played a central role in what happened between the 19th and 20th of February 1945. Ramri Island today is quiet. Fishing villages, tidal flats, mangroves that look exactly as they did 80 years ago. The crocodiles are still there. Number 8 on our list is a place that does not look like a battlefield because the predators that made it one left no monuments behind. There are roughly 1 to 5 venomous snakes per square meter on Ilha da Queimada Grande. That single figure is enough to explain why the Brazilian Navy controls access to the island, and why almost no one has set foot there in decades. But the number alone doesn't explain how this 43-hectare island off the coast of Sao Paulo became the most venomous, snake-dense place on Earth. That story starts at the end of the last ice age. As global sea levels rose, a stretch of Atlantic coastline gradually detached from the Brazilian mainland and became what we now call Snake Island, number 7 on our list. The golden lancehead pit viper, Bothrops insularis, was stranded on this new island with no ground predators and no prey except migratory birds passing through. Evolution responded to that pressure with something precise and extreme. To catch a bird, a snake needs a venom that works fast enough to prevent the prey from flying away after a strike. Over thousands of years, the golden lancehead developed exactly that, a hemotoxic and necrotizing venom that Brazilian herpetologists estimate to be up to 5 times more potent than that of its mainland relatives. It breaks down tissue and prevents blood from clotting at the same time. Without immediate medical treatment, a bite is lethal in the overwhelming majority of cases. The island was not always uninhabited. A lighthouse stood here, operated by a human keeper and, at some point, by a family. A widely repeated account, unverified but persistently documented, claims that the last lighthouse keeper and his relatives died after snakes entered through the windows. The Brazilian government eventually automated the lighthouse and instituted a formal ban on civilian access. The island's appearance gives nothing away. From the water, it looks like any other fragment of Atlantic rainforest. Green ridges, pale rock faces, a clean ocean horizon. The threat is invisible. buried in the leaf litter beneath every footfall. Today, entry requires explicit authorization from the Brazilian Navy. Only tightly controlled scientific expeditions are granted exceptions. Queimada Grande remains open only to researchers, and to the species that has had it entirely to itself for millennia. 6. North Sentinel Island. An area roughly the size of Manhattan has been successfully keeping the entire modern world at arm's length for 60,000 years, and the modern world, for once, has agreed to stay away. Located in the Andaman archipelago of the Bay of Bengal, about 30 kilometers west of South Andaman, this 72-square-kilometer island looks deceptively simple from above. A dense green rectangle ringed by coral reef and a narrow white beach. The jungle grows straight to the waterline. No roads, no lights after dark, no industrial smoke. What makes it extraordinary is not the landscape, but the people inside it. The Sentinelese are one of the last fully uncontacted populations on Earth. Not accidentally isolated, but deliberately so. For decades, every approach by outsiders was answered with arrows and spears. The pattern has been so consistent, so unambiguous, that the Indian government formalized what the island's inhabitants had always enforced. A legal exclusion zone extending 5 nautical miles from the shore. No one has ever conducted a census. No one ever could. Population estimates range from a few dozen to a few hundred. And that imprecision is itself a kind of data point, a measure of how complete the separation truly is. The consequences of ignoring this boundary are not theoretical. In November 2018, American missionary John Allen Chow paid local fishermen to take him close enough to row ashore alone. He intended to convert the Sentinelese to Christianity. He was killed. His body was never retrieved. Indian authorities closed the investigation without charges, a quiet legal acknowledgement that the islanders had acted within a sovereignty the state itself recognizes. 60,000 years of unbroken human presence on one island, 30 kilometers of open water between that world and ours. Ahead on our list, a Japanese island where the threat comes not from outside, but from the ground itself. Every single person on this island is required by law to carry a gas mask at all times. Not as a precaution, not during drills. Every day, everywhere, for as long as they live there. That is the reality of Miyakojima, a small volcanic island in Japan's Izu archipelago, roughly 200 kilometers south of Tokyo. The island covers about 55 square kilometers and is home to around 2,500 people. From a distance, it looks almost idyllic. Thick forests, dramatic black lava coastlines, steep ridges rising sharply from the sea. But the yellowish haze sitting permanently over the landscape tells a different story. The culprit is Mount Oyama, the active volcano at the island's center. In 2001, it erupted with enough force to trigger a complete evacuation. Every resident left, and for nearly 5 years, Miyakojima stood empty. When the government finally allowed people to return in 2005, nothing about the volcano had changed. Oyama continues to vent sulfur dioxide constantly, and that gas does not behave predictably. Concentrations shift with the wind direction, the time of day, and the activity level of the island's fumaroles. At low levels, the gas is merely unpleasant. At high levels, it kills. Because the threat is invisible and the timing is impossible to forecast, authorities built an entire infrastructure around it. Automatic sensors dot the streets, linked to a siren system designed to give residents just enough time, minutes, not hours, to put on a mask or get indoors. Children receive masks at school. Tourists are handed them at the ferry terminal before they even step onto the island. The resulting scenes carry a quality that no documentary filter could manufacture. Fishermen working the shore in full respirators. Families cycling past lava fields with masks clipped to their bags. Vacation photographs framed by plumes of volcanic gas. Number 5 on our list. Miyakojima is a place where danger is not an event, but a permanent atmospheric condition. Slow, silent, and threaded through every ordinary moment of daily life. The next island on our list presents a threat of an entirely different kind. There, it is not the air that is hostile, it is the people, who have refused outside contact for centuries and continue to do so now. Number 4. Bikini Atoll, Marshall Islands. Find it on a map and you'll barely see it. A thin crescent of coral and sand scattered across the western Pacific, the kind of place that looks like it shouldn't exist at all. Turquoise water, coconut palms, a lagoon so clear you can count the fish. In 1946, United States military officials arrived here and told the people who had lived on these islands for generations that their home was needed. Needed, they were told, for the good of all mankind. The Bikinians left. Between 1946 and 1958, 23 nuclear devices were detonated on and around this atoll. Each test reshaped the reef, the soil, the water. Each one deposited something invisible and permanent into the chain of life that had evolved here over millennia. But nothing compared to what happened on the 1st of March, 1954. Castle Bravo was supposed to be a controlled experiment. The thermonuclear device yielded 2.5 times its predicted output, an explosion roughly 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Entire islands were simply removed from the map. The radioactive fallout cloud drifted far beyond any planned boundary, reaching the Japanese fishing vessel Lucky Dragon and blanketing inhabited atolls, exposing hundreds of people to acute radiation. Crew members fell ill. Some did not recover. The contamination wasn't temporary. Cesium, strontium, plutonium, these aren't things that wash away. When the United States permitted Bikinian families to return in 1968, scientists eventually found cesium levels in their bodies high enough to require another evacuation. The reef had looked healthy. The coconuts had grown back. But the food chain itself was poisoned. Plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,000 years. UNESCO added Bikini Atoll to the World Heritage List in 2010. Not as a celebration, but as a document. A place that exists now as evidence of what a single government decision, made in 12 years, can do to an island that took 10,000 years to become home. And if Bikini shows what human choice can destroy, the next place on this list is being unmade by something far older and far less negotiable. 47,000 steel drums of radioactive waste are sitting on the ocean floor less than 30 miles from downtown San Francisco. Nobody is going to pick them up. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is official policy. The Farallon Islands are 7 rocky outcroppings in the Pacific, close enough to the California coast that on a clear day you might almost imagine seeing them from the city's western hills. You cannot visit. Boats do not stop there. Landing is forbidden. Most people assume the restriction exists because of the wildlife. This is the largest seabird colony in the contiguous United States, and every autumn the surrounding waters draw the highest concentration of great white sharks found anywhere on Earth, arriving to feed on the local seal population. The real reason runs deeper than that, literally. From 1946 through 1970, the US Navy used these waters as a dumping ground for radioactive waste generated by nuclear laboratories, hospitals, and research facilities across the country. The method was straightforward. Pack the material into steel barrels, take them offshore, sink them. It was entirely legal under the standards of the time. Those standards were catastrophically wrong. Steel corrodes. The US Geological Survey estimates that many of the barrels have already failed, releasing their contents into the surrounding water. The precise locations of all dumping sites remain unknown. Currents have shifted some barrels far from where they landed. Great white sharks migrating through the area could theoretically carry radioactive isotopes up and down the Pacific coast. When the EPA surveyed the site in the 1980s, engineers concluded that attempting to retrieve the barrels posed greater contamination risk than leaving them alone. So they were left alone, monitored in theory, untouched in practice. Number 3 on our list. And somehow it is not the worst thing we found. Number 2 on this list sits off the northwest coast of Scotland, and from the water it looks like nothing. A smear of green against grey, maybe 1.5 kilometers across. Heather, rock, silence. The kind of place you'd sail past without a second thought. That anonymity was exactly the point. In 1942, with the war grinding through its darkest years, British military scientists from Porton Down needed somewhere remote to answer a question that no one wanted answered in public. Could anthrax be weaponized at scale? Grunar Island was small enough to control, isolated enough to contain, and far enough from everything else that the inevitable could happen quietly. They brought sheep. They detonated bombs loaded with Bacillus anthracis spores. The animals were dead within days. The experiment worked. That was the problem. The spores didn't just kill, they settled. They bound themselves into the soil with a kind of permanence that no one had fully anticipated. When the war ended, the island wasn't cleaned. It was closed. Warning signs went up along the shoreline. The designation was indefinite quarantine because the science was unambiguous. Anthrax spores can remain viable in soil for decades, possibly centuries. There was no plan for what came next because there was no good answer. For nearly 40 years, that was the arrangement. Then, in 1981, an activist group calling itself Operation Grunard changed the calculation. They extracted contaminated soil samples from the island and mailed them to government offices across Britain. The message was blunt: decontaminate it, or we bring it to you. The government moved. Between 1986 and 1987, 280 tons of formaldehyde solution were pumped into the island's earth. In 1990, officials declared Grunard safe. Sheep grazed there again. The land was returned to the descendants of its former owners for £500. But independent researchers continued finding spores in isolated patches long after that declaration. The word substantially kept appearing in official decontamination reports, doing a lot of quiet work. Grunard was poisoned deliberately by one government in a controlled experiment. What comes next on this list was poisoned through sheer industrial scale and decades of neglect, and the damage didn't stop at a shoreline. There is no fence around one of the most dangerous biological sites on Earth. No guards, no warning signs, no perimeter of any kind. Just cracked, sun-bleached soil stretching toward a flat Central Asian horizon that looks like nothing at all. That absence of protection is not an oversight. It is the result of a sea disappearing. Vozrojdenia Island once sat in the middle of the Aral Sea, its remoteness serving as the Soviet Union's primary security measure. From the late 1940s onward, the military biological complex known as Aralsk 7 operated here, complete with its own docks, barracks, testing grounds, and a staff of several thousand. Scientists exposed horses, monkeys, and sheep to aerosolized clouds of modified pathogens: anthrax, plague, tularemia, smallpox. The island's name translates as Renaissance. Nothing was reborn here. In 1988, under mounting pressure from international inspections tied to the Biological Weapons Convention, Soviet command ordered the stockpiles destroyed. Hundreds of tons of anthrax spores, strain 836, engineered for resistance to antibiotics and existing vaccines, were mixed with bleach and buried in 11 pits at the island's northern tip. The operation was rushed. Records were incomplete. Neutralization was inadequate. Then the Aral Sea continued its collapse. Decades of Soviet irrigation diversions had already gutted the basin, and by the early 2000s, the water level had fallen far enough that Vozrojdeniya was no longer an island. It merged with the Kazakhstani shore, then the Uzbekistani shore, forming a continuous landmass. The isolation that had substituted for security simply ceased to exist. A US biodefense team that visited in 2002 described what they found in plain terms. One of the most dangerous, unprotected biological sites on the planet. Anthrax spores remain viable in soil for decades. Rodents burrow through the burial zones. Wind carries dust across borders. Strain 836 is still there. This is number 1 on our list. A woman was imprisoned on a river island for 30 years without ever being convicted of a crime. That island sits in New York's East River, and her name was Mary Mallon, Typhoid Mary. Held there not by a court, but by a government that chose containment over justice. That single fact cracks open the entire premise of civilized authority. 13 islands, each one a place where human power met its own reflection and flinched. A volcanic island that rose from the ocean floor and became proof that nature builds and unmakes on its own schedule, indifferent to human plans. A Japanese ghost city where the population density once exceeded every recorded limit on Earth, then dropped to 0 almost overnight when the coal ran out. A Pacific atoll where 23 nuclear detonations did not just destroy land, they erased the concept of safe return for generations. Beneath the waters off San Francisco, 47,000 barrels of radioactive waste are slowly corroding on the seafloor, placed there under a policy that assumed the ocean was deep enough to forget. A Scottish island was deliberately infected with anthrax during wartime experiments and remained off-limits for half a century afterward. And somewhere in the middle of a shrinking sea, an island holds buried stockpiles of weapons, engineered to kill at a scale that makes every previous war look like a rehearsal. The Andaman Sentinel has refused contact with the outside world for 60,000 years. Perhaps that is not isolation. Perhaps that is the only rational response to everything on this list. 13 mirrors, 1 face. If any of this made you pause, subscribe. The next episode is already waiting.